Thank you very much. So in today's talk, we're going to discuss something that's really very near and dear to me, and that's Kaizen, what I like to call the art and science of continuous improvement. But specifically, given today's conference is a business conference, we're going to discuss Kaizen in the context of business. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see today's agenda. I'll begin with a short foreword, followed by a discussion of what is Kaizen exactly, followed by why Kaizen, why do it at all, what are the benefits? And after that, we'll be able to discuss some tools and techniques, all of which I've used in my daily life, in business, and in other areas as well. Finally, I believe we'll have a few minutes at the end, I believe 5 minutes for frequently asked questions. And then for those of you who are interested, I've put together an appendix of recommended books for you to read if you're interested in this subject. So on the next slide, we'll start with a foreword. Something that really touched me very deeply and really got me thinking about Kaizen was a quote by Deng Xiaoping, who said, "The basic point is we must acknowledge that we're backward, that many of our ways of doing things are inappropriate, and that we need to change." So for some context, Deng Xiaoping mentioned this, he said this in the late 70s as China was recovering from many decades of stagnation. And he realized something very deeply, that in order to succeed, they needed to change in many ways. But the process of change, of course, doesn't happen overnight. And China is, of course, a very big success story in terms of how they turned their economy around. But one of the reasons why they did was implementing Kaizen. So if we move to the next slide, what is Kaizen exactly? I've had people ask me. Well, I like to refer to it as the art and science of continuous improvement, because it is both an art and a science. But what does the word mean actually? Well, it's a Chinese term for improvement or change for better. Therefore, it's synonymous with continuous improvement. But the biggest philosophy behind Kaizen is our way of life, which includes our work life, social life, and also home life, believe it or not, should be constantly improved, right? Taiichi Ono, founder of the Toyota production system, said, re-improve what was improved for further improvement. So you can think of it as sort of a virtuous cycle of improvement, if you will. Kaizen involves asking small questions, thinking small thoughts, taking small actions. So as you begin to practice Kaizen, that's one of the things you should really think about doing, is keeping things small. Small questions, small thoughts, small actions put together combine for great changes ultimately. Kaizen focuses on the process, not the person. We don't necessarily want to change the person. We'd like to change the process so as to help the person improve. The focus is on adding value. So we define value as any action or process that a customer would be willing to pay for, right? That's really key in business. If it doesn't add any value, then the customer doesn't want to pay for it, right? And similarly, waste is defined as a process that adds no value. So what we'd like to do is eliminate waste and increase value. But in speaking about value, one thing to keep in mind is results are not the only thing. They're neither everything nor the only thing, right? We also have an interest in improving morale, improving participation, discipline, helping employees with their communication skills. So I often like to think of Kaizen very holistically. So if we move to the next slide, please. Often people ask me, Well, is Kaizen the same thing as innovation? It isn't, but we'll have a short discussion now on Kaizen and innovation. So let's remember, Kaizen involves small incremental improvements made on a regular basis, right? And we can implement Kaizen with simple, low-cost, common everyday tools. They're generic and can be applied to nearly every aspect of business, as we'll see in the tools and techniques section. On the other hand, innovation, when we think of innovation, it really refers to a huge improvement, right? Either as a result of technological advancements, maybe a very large increase in investment, or maybe some new production technologies, right? But innovation necessarily requires huge commitments, expense, and efforts. So those are some differences between Kaizen and innovation. Another way to think about Kaizen is it's process-oriented, as I mentioned on the previous slide. It's a process-oriented way of thinking, helps you develop strategies that ensure, again, continuous improvement. Let's think of it as this virtuous cycle of improvement, right? And necessarily involving people from all parts of the organization. Now, some people have asked me, well, doesn't Kaizen strip away our humanity? Actually, it's quite the opposite. Kaizen is people-oriented because it's directed at our efforts, right? Improving the process so as to improve business and ultimately improve the individual. But Kaizen and innovation, they're not mutually exclusive, right? Although they're different, they're not mutually exclusive. Look, there's no reason why we can't use both in an organization, right? But we need to understand how to leverage both of them in order to improve business outcomes, because ultimately that's what we're looking to do, right? We're looking to improve business outcomes. And so next, we'll move on. The next slide, we'll talk about why Kaizen? Why should we do any of this, right? And as I'll explain in the tools and techniques section, there are many reasons to implement Kaizen. One of the biggest ones is cutting costs, right? And pretty much every business is looking for ways to cut costs, especially in a challenging environment such as this year. Businesses are looking for new ways to cut costs, to streamline, right? By eliminating waste is one of the major ways, which we'll discuss in the tools and techniques section, but also improving processes in an organization, right? And that's not limited to manufacturing. So oftentimes people think that Kaizen is only used in manufacturing. That's not true. It's used in healthcare, in software, so forth. It'll help us to improve our processes, right? Whether it's in human resources or some other department. Similarly, Kaizen helps us to increase efficiency, right? Again, we go back to eliminating waste, increasing efficiency. When we increase efficiency, we improve business outcomes. Ultimately, of course, increasing profits, something that's very, very important to any business. Again, especially in a challenging year such as this one, cutting costs, increasing profits is huge. And any way that we can help businesses do that is enormous. But again, it's not only about the bottom line. Kaizen also, believe it or not, helps us improve morale. Why do I say that? Well, by improving processes, by increasing profits, by creating a better environment for employees, we definitely improve morale. And ultimately, let's not forget, it's really all about increasing value to the customer, right? We can be very profitable, we can cut costs, but if it doesn't provide value to the customer, it's really not going to be an optimal outcome for our business. So ultimately, Kaizen is about serving the customer by providing value and eliminating waste. That's one of the ways I'd like to think about it. So if we move on to the next slide, please. Now, we're going to get to the meat of the discussion here. I'd like to talk about some tools and techniques, again, many of which I use in my daily life. One of the easiest tools to use is called 5S. So You'll note there's 5 S's. Actually, it's taken from Japanese. The words in Japanese are also start with an S. I haven't put them in here, but so translated to English, right? So 5S is done specifically in this order. Think about an office environment or a manufacturing environment. What's one of the first things you can do to clean things up? It's sort. This involves sorting your workplace items. Also, throwing out what's not needed. If you look at in your office, and also, of course, even in your home, I'm sure you can find some things that you don't really need, right? It leads to clutter and confusion. So the first step is sorting your items, throwing out what's not needed. Next, we set in order, which involves, of course, arranging the items in order, right? And this may involve keeping manuals in a handy place where you can reach them, right? And after you've done that is shine, which involves keeping the workplace clean and free of clutter, right? So you sort items, put them in order, keep it clean. And after you've done that, I would say these last 2 steps are probably even more important than the first 3. The 4th step is standardize, which means we use things such as checklists, standards, work instructions, documentation to help employees keep the work area clean, right? Once you have a process that works, you standardize it by either documentation, providing training, and it becomes a way of life at your company. And finally, the last step, which is really helpful to have management's backing, is sustain. So once we've performed the first 4 steps, we've got a great working environment. It's not going to be optimal unless we can sustain it over a long period of time. So sustain involves performing these actions consistently and repeatedly, thereby having a situation in which it becomes a way of life at your company. So 5S is it's just such a simple tool, but it's really powerful in terms of keeping the workplace clean and clutter-free. And so the next tool, we'll go to the next slide, please, is one of my favorites, and I'm sure many of you have heard of, is Kanban. Where does Kanban come from? Well, it comes from the Toyota production system, right? And just a little bit of background. In speaking about the Toyota production system, it's a pull system versus a push system. What does that mean? Well, we pull supplies and parts as they're needed. This enabled Toyota to come up with their revolutionary just-in-time manufacturing methodology, right? So what's the benefit? Well, reducing inventory, right? Because there's costs with keeping inventory. Improving productivity, decreasing costs, and then, but also most importantly though, having the sort of predictable flow of materials and information. Mind you, this isn't only in a manufacturing environment. Kanban's also used in many other environments. I've used it extensively in software development, right? That's a really good one. It's a really good environment. You could definitely use Kanban in a healthcare environment, in a hospital. Definitely. So if we go to the next slide, there's a real life example. I mean, Kanban isn't complex. It's as simple as you can get a whiteboard, draw a couple columns, right? To do with the Post-it notes. And then as you're working on the items, move them from to do to doing. You're currently doing it. And after it's done, move it to the done column. So as you can see here, again, this is a ridiculously simple example. In real life, it's probably going to be more detailed than this, especially in a business environment. You might have more columns, right? The pending customer, right? Pending vendor, and so forth. But the point to think about is by arranging it in this way, this is a really powerful way to not only make sure you don't take on too many tasks that you can't finish, and also as you finish the tasks, they end up in the done column. So it's a really great way to track work, to have a predictable flow of work, and then also be able to discuss any bottlenecks that might occur, right? For example, if a task remains in the doing column for too long, there may be an issue that you need to address. So Kanban is a tool that I use extensively. I use it at work. I even have one at home for daily tasks, believe it or not. You can use this. So this is really, really powerful. So the next tool I'd like to talk about is Muda, or waste. Muda means waste in Japanese. So Toyota's identified 7 kinds of waste. There are more kinds of waste, but these are some of the most common kinds in a business setting. First one, overproduction. This is a common waste. This is, and here's an example, making more products than you need, right? What's another kind of waste? Excess motion. What do I mean by that? Well, here's an example. Let's just say your office is cluttered and you spend a lot of time looking for manuals. That's unnecessary searching for items. This is a waste. This is, believe it or not, excess motion. We waste time, right? Related to that, another one, waiting. This is self-explanatory, right? Let's just say we're in a production line and we're waiting for the previous step to be completed, right? And so that's why the just-in-time methodology by Toyota was so powerful, because it's set to eliminate this waste of waiting, among other kinds of waste. Another very, very, very common kind of waste, probably one of the most, is waste of inventory. Example, accumulating excess items, right? And believe it or not, there are costs associated with inventory waste. Storage costs, spoilage costs, right? If items spoil, if you keep them for too long. So that's a really, really huge one. Waiting and inventory are huge, huge wastes. But there's other kinds of wastes that are maybe not that obvious, but they're there. Excess movement of material or transportation, right? Whereas excess motion refers to excess motions that we take as a person. Excess movement of materials is a waste too, right? Any movement that doesn't support the production of goods. What do I mean by that? Let's just say you have a manufacturing plant and you've put all the function-oriented departments together. You have to go back and forth. That's considered a waste. Another really common kind of waste is defect correction, right? Fixing errors. That costs money and time. Finally, one of the most insidious kinds of waste, and probably the least obvious one, is excess processing, right? Redundant effort that adds no value. Here's an example. Designing features the customer doesn't want, right? Now, for example, in a software environment, we might come up with a function that we think is terrific, but ultimately, if the customer doesn't want it, it's a sort of waste. So Muda is really, really huge. And again, Kaizen is really all about eliminating waste. Lean is about eliminating waste. And so it's really important to focus on this. The next tool we'll discuss on the next slide is one I really like. It's called the 5 whys. Again, this is so simple, but it's beautiful. This is an iterative method to explore cause and effect relationships, right? The 5 whys helps you in root cause analysis. Here's a real life example. Now, we've all been through this, right? Business deal that didn't turn out well. Imagine yourself after the deal goes sour. Example. So the prospect ended the conversation and left. Why? I'm not sure. I know he seemed to be upset. Why would he be upset? Well, he says we weren't addressing their company's needs. But why would he say we weren't addressing their needs? I don't know. I mean, I offered them multiple solutions. Come on. Why was I offering him a few different solutions? Well, because I was hoping to get the sale as quickly as possible. But why was I trying to get the sale as soon as possible? Because in our culture, we value directness and moving forward quickly. Aha! This is actually a real life example of the 5 whys in action. And with the hope that you produce an aha moment at the end, right? And so the lesson here is we might approach business differently in different cultures, right? And so that's really the beauty of the 5 whys method. It's really sort of a philosophical, iterative method that helps unlock a lot of insights, right? So one thing I'd like to emphasize is it doesn't have to be 5 whys. It might be only 3 whys to get to an epiphany, or it might be 7. But the point is to ask the difficult questions, to ask why, to get to some sort of root cause analysis. So I personally love this tool. It also works in relationships, trust me. So we move to the next slide, please. So time management, again, really, really important in business. A couple tools I really like. One of them is time boxing, right? And this involves allocating a fixed period of time in order to get tasks done, right? So you can think about it in this way. Each time box, right, has its own deliverables, its own deadline, its own budget. And one thing we can do, though, is we can reduce the scope of work, right? If we don't think we're going to get done in the allotted amount of time, we can simply reduce the scope, right? So we keep the time the same, right? We keep the budget the same. We might just be able to reduce the scope so that we get the work done. A real life example from software is sprints, right? In the Scrum framework, for those of you who are involved in software development, sprints are time boxes, right? Typically they're for 2 weeks. And during this 2 weeks, we've got to get this amount of work done. If we find that we're not going to complete all the tasks, we might remove a few, right? But the goal is to get done during this allotted amount of time and budget. So time boxing is really, really powerful. It also sets a constraint and sort of forces you to finish on time. Another one I really, really like is the Pomodoro technique. This involves taking large tasks and dividing them into a series of smaller tasks, right? So here's one way, real life way I like to do it is I'll look at my Kanban board. I'll take a task, any task. I'll estimate how long it'll take me to complete the task. And then if necessary, break down the task into chunks of 25 minutes. Okay? And then take your stopwatch, set it to 25 minutes. And you simply work on the task until time runs out. So if you're finished with the task, you can take a little break. If you need some more time to complete the task, take a 5-minute break and then go back to it and restart the stopwatch, 25 minutes. Keep doing this until you finish the task. One thing I also like to do too is use the Pomodoro technique, do 25 minutes on one task and then maybe move to another one and then back to the first one. So there's no hard and fast rule. You have to sit, for consecutive 25-minute chunks of time to finish the one task. But anyway, this is a really powerful way to manage time because look, we all have, it becomes really difficult to work on the same task for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours without taking a break, right? So these are really powerful tools in terms of time management that I use in my daily life. So if we move to the next slide. Another tool I really like, and again, going back to root cause analysis, is the Ishikawa diagram by Ishikawa. This is also referred to sometimes as a fishbone diagram, also referred to as a cause and effect diagram. This is a really powerful tool. It's a graphical tool that helps illustrate any one of a number of causes for a given problem, right? And so I will be showing you an example of an Ishikawa diagram, but in essence, again, this is the beauty of Kaizen. You can take a piece of paper, right? Draw a box on the right-hand side, draw a horizontal arrow that points to the box. This box is the problem, or what we refer to as the effect. And then, as I'll be showing on the next slide, we have the effect, right, in orange. This is the problem. Draw a horizontal line to it, then draw these other lines, right? So it does actually resemble a fishbone. And you'll note the effect and then the various categories. For example, software, hardware, right? And then for each category, a cause. And what's beautiful about the Ishikawa diagram is it helps us. It shows us graphically any number of causes for an issue, because again, some people process better things better visually. So this really, really helps us. And again, look, you don't have to have 6 different categories. You might only have 4 categories. You might have 10 categories, right? And so the thing to remember with any of these tools is they're flexible, right? Please don't feel the need to create one just like this. Your Ishikawa diagram might be completely different. But the point is to put all the potential root causes, right, onto a single diagram, thereby allowing you to visually process what might be going on. This is a simple but very, very powerful tool in terms of root cause analysis. And if we go to the next slide, please. So PDCA, this is an improvement cycle methodology. This was developed actually many decades ago, initially for solving problems and really important, preventing the recurrence, right? So it's not just about solving a problem once and then having it come back again and again and again. We want to solve a problem and have it not reoccur, right? So PDCA is, again, a really powerful method to help us do this. So P stands for plan, right? So in this step, we define the problem and as a team, come up with possible solutions and causes, right? So this is a planning step. Next, we do or implement a solution. After we implement the solution, we check, see, evaluate the results. Did it work? Did it not work? Finally, act, right? So if it didn't work, we go all the way back to plan, P. Or if it did work, that's great. We standardize, remember 5S, standardize the solution if the results are acceptable, thereby documenting it, thereby ensuring that the problem doesn't come back again. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see what an actual PDCA diagram looks like. And again, yours doesn't have to look exactly like this, nor do you necessarily even have to create a diagram, but this is just to help you visualize what it looks like, right? Planning, identifying the cause, right? Do fixing the problem, right? Check, assess if the problem is fixed. If it is, great, standardize. If it isn't, we adjust. So again, this really goes back to the heart of Kaizen. Why? This is a virtuous cycle of continuous improvement. So I really, really like this tool, and it's been around for a very, very long time, and there's really no surprise why. It's very, very effective. And so we go to the next slide. The final tool I'd like to talk about is one that's very, very, very near and dear to me, Hansei. In Japanese, it's defined as self-reflection. So this involves acknowledging one's mistakes and pledging improvement. Now, this isn't about beating yourself up or beating others up. We never want to do that. Remember, we focus on the process. We don't focus on the person, right? But you take a honest look at the process, honest look at the situation, and pledge improvement, because you can always improve, right? Remember, Taichi Ono, improve, re-improve what was improved, right? So in Hansei, the team holds a self-reflection meeting whereby team members help identify failures experienced along the way. And please note, we don't mean failures by people. We mean failure in the process, right? If you have a great process, it'll really help, right? And most importantly, creating a plan for future efforts, right? And the most important step in Hansei is not necessarily the problem solving, but identifying the root cause. Remember, as we talked about in PDCA, we'd like to make sure that the problem doesn't reoccur. An example of Hansei in the West, the sprint retrospective, again, in the Scrum framework, right? At the end of the sprint, you hold a meeting and you talk about what worked, what didn't work. So Hansei is really, really very powerful to do at the end of a time box or a sprint. So with that, that concludes the tools and techniques. And if we have some time, I'd be happy to take any questions anyone might have.